What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor with Carm on the Case. It is the podcast that brings you the very best guests in true crime, and every Sunday night you get her in 3 dimensions, not the usual cardboard cutout. So it is a privilege to have her here tonight, especially coming off my son's 4th birthday party, which was quite the ordeal today. So we are all in recovery mode. So a lot of news to cover tonight, actually, regarding Bryan Kohberger. He was just indicted last week by a grand jury, and he's going to be in court tomorrow morning. We're going to have Randy preview what to expect there. That will be for his arraignment. And what does this all mean for the trajectory of the case? We're going to discuss that tonight. Police, as I mentioned, say the killer is 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger. We want to remind everyone that Bryan Kohberger is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Best guests, the first time ever we have Randy Zellen, and the first time ever we have a guest in a yellow cab in New York City. You know he's a true New Yorker. He is a New York City-based former prosecutor turned criminal defense attorney with more than 30 years experience in a snazzy-looking turquoise coat there. He tried cases against both the Department of Justice and the SEC. So he is the real deal. He's also an adjunct professor at Cornell Law. He's appeared on everything: Fox News, Fox Business, CNN Headline News, Bloomberg, Newsmax, News Nation, local television, and of course, the best of all, STS, which he'll now put at the front of his resume. The man who looks like he could be an Eminem protege, a rap star, is actually an evidence specialist. Scott Roeder. He is founder of the Evidence Room. He is an internationally recognized evidence specialist who has consulted over 1,500 cases since 2001, including the famous Oscar Pistorius case out of South Africa. The Evidence Room employs a team of specialists with backgrounds in art, 3D modeling, forensic animation, motion graphics, time-based media, biomedical illustration, architectural design, law and crime, and shooting reconstruction. And he is the host of a podcast called Crime Scene Time Machine. Great name. Crime Scene Time Machine, and that is his studio in Cleveland being built out right now. Last but not least, we've got Troy Lambert, an Idaho-based freelance writer, a mystery author, a multi-genre editor, and nonfiction author and ghostwriter. He has a wealth of experience and knowledge, especially about the area in and around Moscow. He also writes for Unbound Northwest, and he is the author of the popular Max Boucher Murder Mystery series. His stepson attended the University of Idaho at the time of these horrific killings. As you all know, you can follow us on Facebook, Facebook, Insta, Twitter, Podcast STS. You can support us at Patreon, become a YouTube member. The merch store is officially linked to YouTube. And as you all know, I like to start these cases by remembering the victims. Of course, Madison Mogan, 21. Kaylee Gonzalez, 21. Xana Kernodle, 20. And her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, 20 years old. Randy, I know you're going to be getting to your spot soon. The grand jury indicted Kohberger this past Tuesday, and now an arraignment tomorrow. What is this secret grand jury all about?
Well, I will say 2 things. First of all, it's very interesting how the prosecution pivoted from doing a preliminary hearing, which is an adversarial proceeding, where the defendant is there with his defense attorney, gets the opportunity to cross-examine the government witnesses, and there's a judge there, where suddenly it turns into a grand jury proceeding, which is secret. No defense attorney, no defendant, no judge. It is a one-sided affair. So certainly the government made a conscious decision to keep their proof away from the defense. So that's one interesting point. As far as the arraignment goes, it's much ado about nothing. It's a formality. He will have the opportunity to have the charges reviewed, read to him. He'll waive it because he's already got the charges. He'll enter a plea of not guilty. And as far as bail goes, he ain't going anywhere. So again, it sounds like a very fancy, important, much to do proceeding, but it's actually ministerial and it's nothing from nothing.
Well, just like a New Yorker, nothing from nothing. But Randy, let me ask you this couple things. First of all, What do you think about cameras in the courtroom? It's been on everyone's mind coming off the Lori Vallow Daybell case, also in Idaho. No cameras are allowed. What I'm finding out about tomorrow, there will be a pool camera tomorrow, and it'll be broadcast after the fact, but not live. Should there be more transparency in the courtrooms?
I will tell you, someone who spends every day in a courtroom, I don't like the cameras in a courtroom. Yes, I get the notion of transparency, but the media can be there. The media can report. The media can do all of the things to make sure that the public is aware of what goes on in court. But I do find that when there are cameras in the courtroom, lawyers play to the cameras, judges play to the cameras, and I really think that it is a disservice to the solemnity of a court proceeding to have the cameras in there. And for me, I would prefer to keep them out. You can be in the hallway, you can report, you can have the reporters in the courtroom taking notes and then reporting. But I do think that there is an acting that goes on. And I think as human beings, we can't help but behave differently because we know that there are cameras there. Listen, I know I behave differently when I'm on camera with you right now than if I were just having a conversation with someone. So imagine what happens in a courtroom. So no, I don't like it.
And I love the sounds of New York City. Randy, I'm going to let you go. Pop back on when you're upstairs and we'll reconnect.
Thank you.
New Yorkers just don't give a crap. They will talk to you anywhere. His wife's yelling at him. Just another. How I lived in that city for 20 years, I will never know.
You said how you lived, married to your wife.
No, how I lived in that city. So, Troy, to you, and then we're going to get. There's a lot to talk about with Scott tonight.
I think New York City is nice. Be careful, you're gonna get hate mail.
I lived in that place forever. It's you got to be a certain type. I have PTSD from that city. Troy, to you, the 4 victims received posthumous degrees from the same university your son graduated from around the same time these murders happened. What did you think of that gesture? Obviously, by the University of Idaho, they're now going to be building a memorial and a garden there. So, just wanted to get your thoughts, and also what is the sentiment like, I guess, amongst Idahoans at this point? We last talked to you kind of at the height of this case.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the degrees are concerned, I think that it was a beautiful gesture. I mean, at least one of the students was just very much on the verge of graduating, and would have graduated almost immediately. So I feel like that's a wonderful gesture on the part of the university, as well as the memorial, because I think even the students that are not there anymore, my son has graduated, his girlfriend has graduated. This is still something that's very much on their minds, as far as just the feeling of safety and security on the campus, and the feeling of how did this happen this close to where he lived. I was watching the Dateline special, and my wife and I were both like, that's our son's apartment. The light in his window, you could actually see on the camera from some of the shots that they had in the Dateline shot. And so it was like, whoa, hey, that's literally how close it was. So for us, that was kind of a big impact, and especially for those kids to go up there, we were like, whoa, we didn't realize it was quite this close. So I feel like it's a really great gesture for the students, especially those that were there during that time. It was a really big deal on campus, and I feel like the university's handling that really well.
And your stepson, he's had some time to sort of digest all this. Is he, what is his response to what happened now? Is it different than the last time we talked, now that he's had time to sort of absorb it all?
I think really, like, him and his girlfriend and some of the other students that I know that were there around that time have really distanced themselves from it. Like, he didn't want to watch the Dayline special with us. He wasn't going to watch it at all. They want to see the killer come to justice. I mean, they want to see him get his due for sure. But I think the majority of them are not watching the news. They're not watching the trial. They're paying attention, but they're receiving their news kind of secondhand. They're not as focused on it, mainly because I don't think they want to relive that. He doesn't want to see those pictures of that house and those kids that were on Dateline. He doesn't want to relive those moments, and I kind of don't blame them at all. And Idahoans in general are just, I mean, it's kind of a simmering anger of, hey, we want this guy to get his, because this kind of stuff is not supposed to happen in these parts of our state. It just doesn't happen. And so there's kind of an anger that we just want him done and put away.
Scott Roeder, I promise you're going to be probably the star of this show, because there's a lot to discuss, but a couple more things now that we've got Randy, you're good with us? Can you hear us?
I'm good.
Awesome. By the way, here it goes already. Patty G. Joel, please be patient and kind and let your dear mom talk tonight. I'm always accused of being harsh on her. The audience wants to hear what she has to say. You're such a good son. Thank you very much. My mother admitted she had a friend in town. She was partying a lot and didn't do as much homework as she would have liked. So that's what happens when your friends are in town.
And by the way, this is true. I didn't do my homework as diligently as I usually do.
As you usually do. So she'll be a little more of a passive observer, but trust me, my mom can't go more than a minute or two without talking. Randy, back to you here. There's a comment. A one-sided prosecution surely doesn't strengthen the case. It is a futile exercise in egotism put forth by the prosecution and has nothing to do with justice. In this case, it was done in poor taste. She's obviously talking about this secret grand jury indictment. Your response to that comment?
Sure. It's very interesting how the grand jury has been completely turned on its head in terms of its function. The reason why the founding fathers came up with the idea of the grand jury was as a check on the power of the government. Remember, we came from a way of doing business with a crown, where the crown basically was judge, jury, executioner, and there were very little by way of rights. So when the founding fathers put our whole system of justice together, they said, let's have a check on the power of the government. Let's get a bunch of ordinary citizens in a room, let a prosecutor test his or her case, put the evidence in front of the grand jury, a body of citizens, and let this body of citizens determine whether or not there's enough evidence to take someone to trial. That's the way it was supposed to be. So when we talk about these secret proceedings and a one-sided affair, that was supposed to be to the benefit of the defendant, to the benefit of the citizenry. And instead, as Sol Wachtler from New York said, right now, the grand jury could basically indict a ham sandwich, because it has become this seemingly one-sided affair with no defense attorney to say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't cool. No judge to say, hey, wait a minute, prosecutor, you can't do this, or you're not doing this properly. So I can certainly understand your viewers saying, grand jury, schman jury, this is not cool. This should be adversarial. But like I said, the reality is it was supposed to be for the benefit of the citizens.
And there was I'm not in the business of promoting other shows, but I guess I am, because there was a 2-hour Dateline Friday night, and there was a couple of new things. So there's a debate on the Twitter sphere about whether they're relevant or not, and that's why we have Scott here to break that down. Scott, this comment I have not seen until now, and I've been covering this case closely. Cheryl writes, one thing I noticed about Kohberger right away when apprehended is he had a badly broken nose. In earlier stops by police for a no seatbelt violation, he did not have the broken nose, followed by, do you suppose Ethan got off a good punch before his stabbing death? As far as I know, I've not heard anyone talk about the broken nose. I might be the only one. Did you notice that? And what would that tell you?
Well, I didn't notice that he had a broken nose, but now that you mention it, maybe, it's a good idea to go back and take a look at that and compare, because you are getting some good profile photographs in that body camera footage that we can compare to photographs of him prior to the incident taking place. I think that would be critical, and I would expect Ethan to get off a punch or two, because we have to look at what the evidence that's been logged by the prosecution so far, and it has Bryan's DNA. So his DNA was deposited in that house in a number of different ways. It could be as a result of a struggle with Ethan, where he was hit in the nose and blood came out, and that's how we were able to get the father's DNA to match an unknown party that was involved in the incident. And then just to go back to the issue on the grand jury, I know, we've always thought that it's a rubber stamp. You could prosecute a ham sandwich but I've been involved just in the last couple of years on grand jury indictments where we've gotten a no bill on a couple of occasions that we've been able to participate in. So I think sometimes the grand jury is opening up a little bit, depending on where you are and in what jurisdiction. But I think it's an interesting, comment by people out there that don't know the grand jury. I think, our learned lawyer from New York City is absolutely correct. But in certain areas of the country, grand jury indictments aren't so, automatic.
If I could, because that's a great point, but let me gently push back. In my experience, when a prosecutor doesn't have the intestinal fortitude to walk away from a high-profile case, that is where you're more likely to see a no true bill. In other words, where the grand jury says, there's not enough evidence. It is rare, very rare in the 35 years that I've been doing this, that a prosecutor goes in seeking an indictment and doesn't get it. It is where a prosecutor really doesn't want the indictment, but doesn't have the guts to say, you know what, I'm not prosecuting this case. Whether it is a politically sensitive case or a racially sensitive case or some case where the public is in uproar and the prosecutor doesn't want to be the one to say, you know something, I know I'm going to catch hell for this. Maybe I won't get reelected, but I am not charging this defendant. So what do? I put it in the grand jury. I do a half-assed job of the presentation. I actually bend over backwards, which I should be doing anyway, to be fair to the defendant. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. They voted to no true bill. Now the prosecutor can get behind a mic and say, hey, grand jury spoke. We respect the decision.
Boy, you're peeling back the onion pretty quick there, but you're right about that. I think to a degree, I'll defer to you, the lawyer in the crowd, as to what goes on behind the scene. I just think there's a problem with over prosecution in the country. Prosecutors have the most power when it comes to charging crimes, and to have prosecutors uniformly throughout the country take a deep breath and put on a fair case to a grand jury, I'm all for that and promote that fairness at that process.
You're seeing best guess in action. These guys know their stuff. Troy, to you, Christy Gonzalez, the mother of Kaylee Gonzalez, spoke out. You're, a father of a son who went to the University of Idaho, so you can relate on the familial level. Thank God you can't relate on the other level. But she says, I was completely overwhelmed when she saw Bryan Kohberger in court. I actually almost thought I was going to pass out. My daughter saw him face to face and in a very different light than when we saw him sitting there in court looking very meek. What do you think it must be like? The Gonzalez's are the one family speaking out, but you also write fiction related, to murder stories and murder mysteries. Is this how you would expect a family that's been stricken by such grief and a horrific tragedy and such heinous violence? Is this how you would expect them to act in terms of their mourning and grieving process?
Oh, for sure. I think there'd be definitely two aspects to that. There's the grieving and the missing of your loved one and your family, but there's also a certain amount of anger that what caused that, and that cause is sitting right in front of you in a courtroom. And I think different people have different reactions. As a guy, as a man who grew up in Idaho, I would want to just take out that guy personally, if at all possible. You know what I mean? I mean, because he took away my family. Not that I would ever actually do that. Disclaimers and all that kind of stuff.
We're on the air.
I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy that the justice system.
If something should happen to Mr. Kohberger, you were only kidding.
Settle down.
Yeah.
You know who to hire, Troy.
Exactly.
I got your back, man.
I know who to hire, and I know who to consult about potential evidence issues. But anyway, absolutely. But I think also there's a certain amount of just shock as like, that was the person that was over my daughter. She saw him in a completely different light. Looking at it from your child's point of view would be incredibly difficult. Making you want to pass out would be a completely normal reaction, I would think.
By the way, Carm, if I do get in trouble, please hire Randy Zellin. I've seen enough in the first 10 minutes. I want him hired immediately, and I might need him. I'm a bit of a hothead. Randy, to you, in a different context, you can see some god-awful defendants in the courtroom, and you see them, in a different posture, just sitting there, and either in the jumpsuit or in a suit with hair part on the side. How does one reconcile the fact that here's this guy that looks kind of dopey, and then he's accused of these heinous and hideous accusations of his quadruple homicides? What's it like for you as an attorney to deal with that?
As an attorney, it is my responsibility, and it's a responsibility that I take very seriously. I'm not a judge, and I tell my clients, I don't care what you did. That's not my job. It's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to follow the evidence or the lack of evidence and give you the best defense that I can. And what people don't understand about lawyering, there are really two things that I think get lost in translation. And yes, lawyers are always the butt of jokes, and it's not fun these days to be a lawyer, but I'll let you in on two things. Number one, most people will call their lawyer before they call their doctor when there's a problem. And second of all, when Shakespeare said, let's kill all the lawyers, or when Don Henley said, let's kill all the lawyers, that was meant as a compliment. It was not meant as a slight. But the point is, as a lawyer, two things people really lose sight of. Number one, what great lawyering is. Great lawyering is really nothing more than being a great storyteller. Because when all is said and done, what a jury will do is will make a determination whose story is better, whose story makes more sense, whose story can I follow along with. It's no different than your podcast. Zillions of people watch this podcast because they can follow the story. They can connect the dots. It's interesting. It makes sense. It's no different than in the courtroom. If the jury can't follow the story, if the story doesn't make sense, then the lawyer loses the jury. That's one thing. But I think the other thing that really gets lost when it comes to lawyering is that while a prosecutor doesn't have to prove motive, it's awfully helpful to be able to prove a motive because that's part of the story. And right now, I don't know anyone that has been able to come up with a motive for Bryan Kohberger that makes any sense.
I got one.
Go ahead.
I think he's a wannabe serial killer.
And well, then I think then
you
go down an interesting.
Well, he is a serial killer if he's convicted, because this is 4 killers. But I think this guy fits the profile of a 18 to 35-year-old single white male incel who's isolated himself. He's an awkward individual. He's been that way his entire life. We've heard stories. This guy fits the profile of a school shooter. This guy fits the profile of somebody who's trying to gain relevancy through power and control.
Except what's interesting in what you're suggesting, and I hear what you're saying. Again, I'm not sure yet that a jury will be able to buy into the story of, I wanted to know what it was like to kill someone, or I wanted to know what it was like to kill someone and get away with it. Because remember, that will be the prosecutor speaking to the jury. Why did Bryan Kohberger do this? It's not the typical situation.
Right.
I was in love with this girl and I snapped in a moment. of
Well, we have him in his own words as a student, putting out a questionnaire to the public of people who have committed crimes, been caught, and he was probing them psychologically. Why did you do this? What were your decision makings? How do you feel after the fact? So I think that there is some kernels there that they can tie.
I'm gonna argue with you. I'm gonna side with the lawyer.
Go ahead.
Because as a storyteller, here's the thing: stories have to make sense. And our public has increasingly been inundated with stories, legal thrillers. And so they expect certain things to come out when they go on a jury because they've all seen Law and Order and CSI. And so they want a motive. They want a clear motive. In a fiction story, I have to make that motive believable. Otherwise, I don't sell any books. A lawyer has to make that story believable because the jury has to buy it to convict the killer.
Hey, Randy, I want to correct you on one thing. You said a zillion people are watching. It's actually a gazillion. And secondly, I'm worried about my Jewish mother. She has not usually she doesn't go more than 30 seconds without talking.
I want to say something far out. You know how sometimes.
By the way, Randy, in all your years of doing all your media, you've done everything. I like to interrupt. I did it on purpose this time. Have you ever seen a sharp 83-year-old Holocaust survivor licensed therapist come into the game the way Carm does?
Never. This
Never.
is such a privilege.
Because I am almost 84 and I forget in the middle what I wanted to talk about. He does it on purpose, cuts into it so that this time I remember.
Go for it, Carm. The floor is yours.
That you know how sometimes they say that a criminal comes out because it's suicide by police.
Mm-hmm.
That exists, right?
Yes.
Now, judging this guy's past psychologically, he felt that he was. He didn't even feel that he was real. He didn't feel his own existence. He was very dissociated from himself. And it's very possible that one of his motives, he just wanted to feel something real and he did not care. This was his attempt to do something horrible and real. And that's why he had this major in detective work. It was in a certain way a wish to kill and the wish to die.
Randy, she comes from the Anderson Cooper School of 13 News Cycles to get a question out, but her question is valid.
He always translates from English to English.
Yes, and her question is valid, but is that something what Carmela just presented? Is that something a jury is going to buy, that he wanted to feel something?
I think with what we know right now, to me, and I'll just throw it back, if I wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone, it seems to me, and I wanted to get away with it, because remember, unlike a school shooter where I know I'm not leaving the school, so I'm going to probably get killed by the police. We see with most of the school shooting cases, the person gets caught either there or gets killed there. It's not all that often that anybody gets away. I know we saw it in one or two occasions, even in the recent shooting at Michigan State, but even that defendant didn't get very far. So when we talk about wanting to die, I don't know that this fact pattern fits that, because remember, he went in, cover of night, masked, dressed all in black, broke into a home of college students where he had to have known odds are it wasn't going to be a one-on-one kind of thing. We don't know that he'd ever been in the house before, so he was able to case it, stake it out. It seems to me that if he wanted to do something and die, I don't know that he would have chosen that as the way to commit the crime. And if he wanted to do it and get away with it to see what it would feel like, why again would you go into a house where you don't know how many people are there? What's going on there? It seems to me, I mean, listen, go to some place where there are a bunch of homeless people, kill some nameless, faceless, homeless person, and then just disappear into the night if you just want to pick a random person to see what it must feel like to kill somebody. So when we talk about motive, I don't know that the prosecution is there yet. And maybe that's why they put the case in the grand jury and decided not to do the preliminary hearing, because I don't even think the prosecution knows yet truly what the motive is.
He may, first of all, there is a numbness, there is a dissociation from himself. Second, 100% he has issues with women, okay?
And by the way, this stuff is all in his own words. He says he feels like a sack of meat and things like that. These are all in his own words.
Third, he has issues with young women who are not accepting him and rejecting him and so forth. And the third is, if he has suicidal wishes, first of all, he left the sheath of the knife there, and he drove his Elantra right through. Obviously, he was going to be found. He knew enough about, but he didn't want to be killed on the spot. He's still playing the game right now, figured out, the intellectual game of outsmarting them. But I think he realized that the end game will be that he loses. He has to.
This is a therapist versus attorney. Scott, I know
I can twist it further, but I will spare you guys.
Scott, I want to get you back in, but I just want to. One of the evidence elephants in the room related to what you do, this home at 1122 King Road, which some are now calling Queens Road because of the three women in there. But 1122 King Road, they're talking about demolishing it ahead of this trial. What's your reaction to that? Is that a huge mistake? It would help potentially a defense attorney like Randy, but it would kill someone like you.
No, I think that's terrible. I mean, you have to preserve, listen, this trial's not going to go on forever. We would ask the community to hold on a little bit longer until the trial's over. You do not demolish that house. You keep that house in as close condition as you found it, as practicable and as, within the realm of good taste in the courtroom, so that you can take this jury to that house and do a walkthrough. That's going to be important. Now, a lot of times those houses aren't available, whether they're sold or remodeled or everything's all different and whatnot. And that happens to me all the time, then that's why I build 3D models and do animations of the reconstruction so that you can see things in people's perspective as it happened, as the evidence is laid out, and all the interrelationship aspects of the evidence, which is really what we do, is the contextual analysis of the interrelationship of the physical and forensic evidence to give you a firsthand perspective, a tactile thing. But if you have that house still there is smells, there's breezes, the way the doors close, the way your foot walks on the stairs. Those are all intangible, transient pieces of evidence that can't translate through a reconstruction of something that I could do. That's something you need, that physical place, so that people can experience it. And just to go back to the other issue about good lawyering, is I think even the worst of us need the best defense to save that defense for the rest of us. That's why I think good lawyers are there, to protect the worst of us, to save the rest of us. And that's all I have to say about lawyers, because we need them.
What does it mean?
Scott,
defend the worst kind of people. Defend the worst kind of people. Like OJ, for example, he needed the best lawyer to preserve justice so that when somebody is actually innocent, we have that standard available for the rest of us.
And by the way, let me continue on with that point, because the truth of the matter is, and it's been spun so many different ways, whether you want to say, again, I would rather have 1,000 guilty or 1,000,000 people who are guilty go free than one innocent person convicted, when you want to talk about society is only as good as the worst of us.
Yeah.
But here's the other point. What it really boils down to is, if the system works, if a judge does what a judge is supposed to do, if a juror and a jury does what they're supposed to do. If a prosecutor does what a prosecutor is supposed to do, and if the defense does what the defense is supposed to do, when the system works, it's like an engine. The right result is going to come out. I can't tell you what that right result is, but justice is going to get done. It's when one of them doesn't do their job, the system
or does
goes
it for the wrong
haywire.
reason, or inspired by, personal gain or whatnot.
So it's really up to everyone, including the defense. The defense is there to make sure, hey, judge, you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. Prosecutor, you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. Juror, you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. We all have a function, a job. So you can make fun of lawyers, but we are there to make sure that the system operates correctly. And if it does, you will get the right result every time.
Randy, I don't make fun of attorneys because I've been in too many of their homes and their New York City apartments to make fun of them. Because as my dad said, they're laughing all the way to the bank. Frankie Figs. Troy, I wanted to go back to you on the house issue. Again, you're in there in Idaho. I wanted to get your perspective. Again, your son went to the University of Idaho. It is obviously a house of horrors, brings up horrific memories. Would you like to see it torn down immediately? Are you okay waiting through the duration of the trial to preserve the evidence, as Scott suggests?
I'm with Scott on this one. I would preserve the evidence. And the reason for that is primarily I don't feel like it's an urgent matter to destroy the house. It's boarded up. It's protected. There's nobody going there. I understand it's probably a burden for the police in the area to protect that crime scene, but that's their job, and preserve that crime scene. And I feel like I would rather see it preserved so that we can ensure that all the evidence that needs to be available at that trial is still available, rather than destroying the house right away. Now, to be fair, that also comes from the perspective of someone who understands the rules of evidence, understands all this stuff from writing about it, and goes, no, I think that's a really bad idea from an overall bird's eye understanding of the system. So an average person may be more emotionally invested in saying, I want to see that place destroyed. I want to see that house of horrors taken down to the ground. Not me, because I want to make sure that everything's there, that any lawyer, anybody on the defense, prosecution, whatever has, that's there to see the right result, exactly what Randy's talking about.
Yeah, by the way, if a freight train went right through the middle of Randy's apartment right now, you know what he'd do? He would keep talking, unfazed by any and all ambient sound. Right there, the ambulance, right on cue. Frankie Figs. Assuming what they have is DNA on the sheath and the phone records, what would be a good defense strategy? I mean, I know, Randy, it's much more involved than a simple.
How about a plea?
What did he say?
How about a plea?
How about a plea?
No, but wait a second. I have a question before
Here,
that.
she's warming up now. Go for it.
I'm warming up. I am going back to the knife and the sheath of the knife that he left on the bed in the house, and I would like to hear what you gentlemen think. How do you explain that?
Scott Roeder.
How do I explain the sheath left on the bed? Well, I think the sheath, I mean, that's a huge error, by this guy, Bryan Kohberger. If he was, I think this guy, I think, is a narcissist. And I think that's why he didn't choose a harder target. I think he was surprised that Ethan was there. And I think Ethan, being a big, strong kid, could have and probably did fight back to some degree. And that could be why he forgot the sheath on the bed. And I'm not sure if it was found on the bed or if it was just in the room. I know it had his DNA on the button and so forth, which would mean that they got that DNA off of it, or that DNA was deposited on it before he committed the crime, because while he committed the crime, most likely he was wearing plastic rubber or wearing gloves. So that's a fatal error by Kohberger, but you would expect some sort of an error by a kid who's just becoming a murderer. That's why I really like him as a potential serial killer, because everything that this kid had done was very calculated. I think the evidence is going to come out that he was stalking these girls, that he was going over to this house and making sure it was a soft target. Somebody in that house slighted him in some way, most likely. And I think he was very easily slighted. And I think that Sheath being there is a mistake as a result of something that he encountered that threw him off guard, whether it was a physical attack defense from Ethan or one of the girls. But I think something happened that caught him off guard that made him make that mistake.
By the way, Dateline aired a 2-hour special Friday night. I had been in media long enough to know that I wasn't expecting much from it. Some people loved it. I thought it was good. It wasn't fantastic. It was good. One of the revelations, Scott Roeder, is that, by the way, Dateline had a single source, and we don't know who that source is or how reliable, but that the knife was purchased more than a year before, and it was purchased in Pennsylvania and brought to Pullman, Washington, and then Moscow if he did commit these crimes in the car with him. What kind of relevance does that have to you, having gone on Amazon to allegedly buy this knife? How do you look at it?
I think it's ceremonial. I think that knife meant something to him. I think he was picking out the weapon that he wanted to be known for, and I think that was the weapon that he chose. He had some kind of an attachment to it emotionally, or something that inspired him diabolically, that he wanted to be connected with that weapon. And I think that he chose that weapon, brought that weapon with him, and he's been planning this, I think, for quite a long time. And I think if he wasn't caught, we could be hearing from him, and we may hear from him on other matters that have yet not been brought to the court. I know that there's dead animals that were killed in the area prior to this. That could be a practice. There's missing persons back in his hometown. I think this trial might be the beginning of the Bryan Kohberger story, not the ending. And I think that if the police did catch him before more people were killed, then that's a great thing for a community. But I think I'm looking at a broader scope of this. And I think that knife falls into place as a narcissist who's trying to make his mark by doing something diabolical. And I think that's why I picked that knife.
And we're going to be discussing his quick programming. Tomorrow night we have Greg Cooper and Dean Jackson of the Cold Case Foundation, as well as an Idaho attorney, and Greg Skordas, a really savvy criminal defense attorney. Wednesday, and I'll mention it again, big day. We're going to do a lunch live, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. We have Jennifer Koffendorfer, former FBI agent. You see her on TV all the time. We have Kerry Rawson, BTK's daughter, a true crime devotee. She knows everything going on. And the third person on that panel this Wednesday, 12:30, Brian Enton of News Nation. The guy is a true crime king in that world. So he will be on 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Do not miss it. And I'll be announcing that quite a few times. Randy, I'm going to unmute you so we can hear the mellifluous sounds of those horns again. Sally Vela, I think the defense attorneys are going to jump on the evidence collected, saying it was contaminated by incompetent cops, just like they did in the OJ trial. Do you foresee that happening? There was some criticism, I have to say, aimed at the Moscow PD, but it seems like they got their man, and in a pretty timely fashion. But what say you?
Well, listen, I could not have said that any better myself, because when you're building a house of reasonable doubt, and that's what you do sometimes as a defense attorney, when your story, when you can't craft a story that exonerates your client, you just don't have the story to say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you what happened here and why Bryan Kohberger, my client, is innocent. Let's say you don't have that. So now what you have to do is you've got to focus your attention on creating reasonable doubt. What is reasonable doubt? Interestingly enough, it's not simply a doubt based upon reason, which is how most judges will explain it to a jury. That's like really helpful. Thanks a lot. No. What reasonable doubt is, anytime you have to make a very important decision in your own life, whether or not to have open heart surgery, for example. If I have all the information I need to schedule my surgery, I don't have a reasonable doubt. If I need a second opinion, I have a reasonable doubt. So here, what you need to do, if you know that one damning piece of evidence, and that is a damning piece of evidence, if his DNA is in that house, unless there's a legitimate reason why he's been in that house before, it is over.
What about the other way? What if their DNA, the women's DNA or Ethan's DNA, is in his home in Pullman, his apartment?
Just as bad, because this ain't OJ. This is not a race thing. And I'll never forget watching that HBO special where they had all of the white people watching the verdict and all of the African American.
I remember that. Oh yeah,
that was chilling because that case had nothing to do with the evidence. That was a race thing saying, we have had enough. Here, you don't have that. So what you do here as a defense attorney, that sheath, if that sheath has his DNA on it and it's in that house, it's over. Conversely, if one of the victim's DNA is in his car, it's over. How are you going to explain that? There's only one way to do it. And that's where you start building a foundation of sloppy police work. Because once you start planting the seed of sloppy police work and you can cross-examine on the things that the police did wrong or did inappropriately or were sloppy or missed it or didn't do this and shouldn't do that, now all of a sudden, is it plausible that the police made an error and contaminated that sheath? Or did they do it on purpose because they knew they had this guy dead to rights? They screwed the case up by being sloppy. And now somebody like the movie Naked Gun, where you found the evidence in the drawer 20 years later, someone has to fix this. So just the way defendants make mistakes, so does law enforcement. And sometimes it's negligent. Sometimes it's reckless. They close their eyes to the high probability that they've messed up. And sometimes in a moment of panic, in a moment of desperation, you fix it. So don't be surprised. The more damning the evidence you find in that house from a DNA perspective, the construct will be it was either contaminated because it was sloppy or it was done on purpose. What I think will get the prosecution over the top, if they can get the knife, the actual purchased knife, whether it was Amazon or Walmart, wherever it was, and we've heard the stories that they've sent subpoenas out. If they can get that knife in Mr. Kohberger's hands and then have the medical examiner do a comparison of the wounds and be able to say that the wounds match up to that knife, that may be something that negligence, sloppiness by law enforcement, it can't be overcome.
Well, I think that could go both ways. That knife cuts both ways. If I was on,
no pun intended.
Hey, that was an easy one over there. But if I was on the defense, there's two strategies that I would take. And I'm not a lawyer, but I would assume they're going to do a couple of things. One, and this is sad, but everybody's going to have to be prepared for this. They're going to be attacking the character of each one of those victims from the defense perspective throughout the course of this trial. They're going to be detailing every one of those Venmo transactions. They're going to be detailing every one of those things. Who was buying drugs? Who was getting stuff delivered? What was going on? Who are the other shady people coming in and out of this house? That's one strategy. I'm not saying that's a good strategy. I'm just saying that's a strategy that they may take because there's evidence of that throughout this whole case that has been out in the public that's fully available. And I know that the defense attorneys are going to do that because they've got nothing else. Now, as far as that knife goes, now let's say they get that exact knife and they put it in his hands in the courtroom. I'm not sure you're going to be able to physically be able to have him hold that knife. But if they get that knife and it doesn't match the cut wounds, or it causes confusion, sometimes it's better not to have it than to go through the complicated process of getting a forensic medical examiner to take a specific knife and show how the serrated edges match up to the skin wounds of each individual victim. That's very, very difficult to do. You have to have a very experienced medical examiner to be able to get, you can say, okay, the knife, but it's got all these serrated edges, and if it's got a backside to it, that's tough business. And I don't know very many medical examiners that can take a specific knife and match it to a specific wound on the contours, maybe on the depth, but not on the contours. That's a hard thing to do. So I'd say, sometimes you're better off with what you got.
Troy, I'm coming back to you in 1 second, but back to the counselor here from Laura Waldy. Have we arrived at the discovery phase of this case now that the grand jury has indicted, or is that still to come? What is going on in regards to all the evidence now?
Well, generally speaking, New York now being the exception, where once upon a time, many jurisdictions, discovery did not start until an indictment. Prosecutors were free, if they wanted to, just to be nice people and to play it down the middle. If they wanted to, could engage in discovery. But technically, in many jurisdictions, discovery, the clock starts to run at an indictment. In New York, it's changed because we've had discovery reform, and prosecutors, quite frankly, hate it because they are now turning over discovery literally at the arraignment on a felony complaint. And it's a tremendous undertaking. But let's assume that the clock starts with the indictment. Yes, they'll be turning over evidence as a matter of statute. They may have been turning it over already, and discovery will be ongoing because in a case of this magnitude, the investigation is not going to stop. It may even continue while the trial is ongoing. And with everything that is uncovered, it all has to be turned over. It is not supposed to be a trial by ambush. Yes, you don't get the same discovery, and we could have a whole podcast on why you get more discovery in a civil case when it's just about money than you do in a criminal case when someone's liberty is at stake. But put that aside. You still get a tremendous amount of discovery. You get certain discovery by rule earlier on. Then as the trial draws nearer and the government decides who their witnesses are and who their exhibits, what their exhibits are going to be, you will get additional discovery. But here, discovery is going to be rolling. It's going to be ongoing. And quite frankly, if I'm a prosecutor, I am going to do my damnedest to convince the Kohberger team that you don't want to try this case.
And by the way, Randy was a prosecutor at one point. Stephanie Ella, happy birthday to your son. A few people have wished him a happy birthday. He turned 4 last Sunday. The party was today. It was a Formula One party. We had race cars out front, thanks to my chief marketing officer here. And he said it was the greatest day of his life. So thank you.
And we needed a lawyer because
we needed a lawyer because we were not permitted, Randy, and we did it anyway in New York fashion. God don't.
In the street.
Carm looks, no one ever says Joel looks fabulous. They always say Carm looks fabulous as we are wearing clashing greens. Troy.
I'm still not happy with the sheet because I wanted to hear from everybody what they think.
We're going to get back to that.
Why was it left there?
They already went over. We're going to get back to that.
One person went over it.
Carm, we'll go over it.
I think it was an accident, Carm.
I have,
he just said he thinks it was an accident. He left it. A lot of people say he did not expect Ethan. He did not expect Ethan and Maddie to be there. He was stunned by that and was in a hurry to get out. They say he may have had tunnel vision, didn't even see the 2 surviving roommates, and in the madness, he probably left the sheet behind.
But it was a very Freudian accident.
Well, Carm is a therapist, so she's looking for the psychological reason why, so he's was he trying to get caught? But Troy, my question to you, now they're going to yell at me for being too quick with you, Carm, but too
No,
bad.
when you sum me up, like I couldn't express.
Well, you and Anderson Cooper take 93 news cycles to spit out questions. He should be doing it much faster because he's been an anchor for 30 years, but he still
Okay.
seems to take
All
forever.
right.
But Troy, to you, look, we just came off the Alec Murdaugh trial. We covered that. A father who kills his wife and son. Then Lori Vallow, who thinks her children are zombies. 5 people wind up dead there. Close to 5 people, if not 5 people, at the Alec Murdaugh trial. Is reality starting to outpace fiction in terms of these stories? I mean, can you make this stuff up as a murder mystery writer? Or are you now taking your cues from reality when I think at one point it was the other way around?
Well, I mean, the truth is, in fiction, it has always had to, mysteries have to make sense to a certain extent, and they happen in a certain order, and that's what people expect. And reality doesn't happen that way. Reality, there are people that do things. For instance, just to go back to your mom's comment of leaving the sheath, nobody, no killer is as smart as they think they are. They inevitably, the way we catch them is they make mistakes. And he was incompetent, more than likely. If it was his first kill, or even if we discover it was second or third, inevitably you're going to make mistakes. Just like anytime you try something new. So he's going to make mistakes. That's what criminals do. And in fiction, we rely on those type of mistakes. That's how people get caught, and we make a really nice, fascinating story with a nice little twist at the end. Oh, it wasn't Kohberger, it was this guy over here, and this is why. And look, he's been in this case all along. And that'd be really cool for that to happen. But that's not the way. Like, in other words, his case is not a case that I could turn into a fiction case because he got caught quickly. There were a few other suspects. It isn't something that people are going to buy as a fiction case. So I think that, but reality in a lot of ways is much stranger than fiction, and people do things that are, unimaginable to one another. And for fiction, sometimes we have to dial that back a little bit, or we freak people out a little too much. So reality sometimes is a little harsher than fiction, but fiction is intended as an escape, and I get to solve the puzzle, not I want to see this incredibly bad person that, oh my God, killed somebody and gets caught relatively quickly. That would make a really terrible story.
Well, I think, just to add on to that, I think reality, sometimes bad people are just bad. And whereas in fiction, you can twist all kinds of wonderful things on why they're bad so that it makes sense that people are bad because this guy went through this and this and this, and that's why he's like this. I don't know if we're going to be able to get that whole story on Bryan Kohberger. And sometimes we're left with that empty feeling that sometimes there's just evil.
Yeah, sometimes there's no why. In real life, sometimes there's no why. It's just this dude is a bad guy and decided to kill some people.
Or you can say,
unfortunately, yeah.
No, I was saying that I forget which of you two gentlemen mentioned that he's a narcissist.
I did.
And Joel, you did?
Yeah.
That diagnosis also, I feel that it's a little bit of a gentle diagnosis.
How would you diagnose him, Carm? How would you diagnose? By the way, Randy, I cannot afford your billable hours. I know Steve Cohen talked to you in a rush. We usually go about an hour and 20. If you have to jump, I know you will let me know you have to go. But
it's Sunday night. He already spent a pleasant weekend.
It is a privilege to be on, and I'm also learning. So I'm happy to stay.
I love it. Where does he have to be?
Yeah, Carm said he's already suffering enough, so let him suffer some more.
No. I said he had a good weekend. This is just the final touches of the weekend.
He's going to watch Curb Your Enthusiasm or something.
No. I'm going to watch Succession followed by Barry.
Oh, there you go. Look, there you go. Succession followed by Barry. 2 good shows. Carm hasn't heard of either of them.
No,
Don't worry.
I haven't.
Don't worry.
I'm not behind the time.
Carm, were you going to bring something up just now?
I brought
the narcissist. My diagnosis was generous. What is more extreme than the narcissist that you call them?
How you diagnosed Kohberger, Carm?
Well, he certainly was not a mild diagnosis. He might have been borderline.
Yeah.
That is
dissociative.
Yeah.
Personality disorder. Yeah. I mean,
Um,
would you look in his childhood for tremendous trauma, or would you look for a lifelong behavior of just a kind of blank face? Like, what are you looking for in his childhood?
I mentioned Freud before. People are still trained to think of the childhood, what happened to the childhood in the childhood.
Yeah.
The same childhood, two people can have the same childhood. That they were fat and they were bullied and that they had a very hard time. I was yesterday. I'm going to sidetrack. I don't care.
I'm going to sidetrack
It's
first.
my show. No, I
Okay,
will
you
first.
sidetrack first.
Yesterday I was with a friend to the museum and I saw this artist Kusama, who is a Japanese woman who does like installations, and she is doing all this from a mental institution. Okay, she is living in a mental institution because she hallucinates and sees things and so forth. And this is
you could argue I live in one too.
Yes, you live in one. And the point is that she creates the most magnificent, incredible, creative things, and somebody else murders.
Well, Carm, you just stole the point I was going to make exactly. So I am.
No, don't start it. I am.
I am writing a book right now. I have a book deal with a publisher in New York City, and it is the same title as this podcast, but it is actually advice from my Holocaust survivor, licensed therapist, co-host podcast mother. That is the book. And in doing research for the book, back in 1999, I went, this was way before the book, obviously, but I had gone previously and interviewed my mother's friends. They, at 60 years old, never really discussed they all went through the Holocaust. Rita, who I am writing about, she was, without getting too heavy and deep, but it's pretty heavy and deep, during the war in Poland, and I have the words on camera to support this. She was hidden with her mother in a graveyard in an oversized coffin and was brought food for months at a time. Wow. And she went on to be one of the most preeminent architects in the state of Israel, a famous architect. Yes. And she could have
wins awards. It makes me feel like a loser compared to her.
And she could have. It was these three women who went through horrible experiences. Never discussed it because they didn't want to dwell on it. But my point is, she could have easily, in the way we're describing Kohberger, she should have been a mass murderer with what she went through, but she did not.
I don't know about that. I mean, somebody that was an evil force that swept the world. Versus an evil person, one person. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I don't have any experience in that, but that just seems such being swept up in such a huge event in the world, like almost like a tsunami, versus something so individualized.
I don't know what happened to Kohberger. I really don't know what happened to him, but I know that his two sisters. One of them, I know for a fact, went into, quote, the mental health area.
And by the way, she was fired from her job.
The irony is now that he was found and accused, they fired his sister from her job, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, that is ridiculous. Back on track here.
Yes, we are going to get back.
Randy,
is my
this question here, if Kohberger is in no way linked to the four victims, if they can't link him there, but how can the defense explain away the DNA on the sheath? What are your defense instincts immediately telling you here?
The only thing you could possibly do is create a narrative of sloppy police work. And if you can show other instances during the investigation where law enforcement screwed up, whether it's that they missed evidence or found evidence way late down the road or didn't interview this person, took too long to interview that person, maybe contaminated some other piece of evidence, allowed the home to be demolished. Maybe we find out that a statement had to be taken over again. Maybe there was a 911 call. Whatever it is, I mean, you just start throwing stuff up against the wall, and you see what sticks. And if things begin to stick, then all of a sudden, putting it out there to the jury that that sheath was contaminated, where you're not accusing anyone of intentional misconduct, but simply being sloppy. The sheath was there with other known DNA evidence of Kohberger, and it got contaminated or got cross-contaminated. Or you really push all your chips in and say, in an act of desperation, they are trying to frame Kohberger for these murders because the person is still out there. And the earlier point of now looking at the victims, and that is an awfully dangerous road to go down. You start taking a crap on kids who were killed, who were murdered. You could alienate a jury in about a millisecond. But if in fact the prosecution doesn't have a strong story and there's a thread to be unwound, that thread could be that maybe one of these kids was into a drug dealer. Maybe one of these kids was running with a bad crowd. And then all of a sudden, where there's no motive for Kohberger, now maybe there's a motive. And I will tell you, you talk about the Murdaugh case. It may very well have been that this notion of Alex Murdaugh being into drug dealers as the motive for the killing of his son and his wife, it may very well have been that if Alex Murdaugh had not taken the stand, that such a storyline could have had some legs to it.
Yeah, I agree. Big mistake calling Murdaugh to the stand.
Yeah, huge, I thought. By the way, people weighing in on the nose, it was broken in high school when he was taking wrestling or judo to boost his self-esteem. This was spoken about before. A lot of people said it was broken years prior. So there you go. Look at this one, Carm. This is a first. Old Lady Snoop. Carm looks thin. Are you all eating? Please take care of number one. That's you guys. Carm, if you guys don't know.
I look skinny. You should see my whole self. You only see my face.
By the way, she hits the gym like 4 days, 3 days a week, 4 days a week. She pumps iron. She's in there with puts on a headband. She's ready to go. She's all good.
I just want to make a commercial. You know, there is PTSD, like, you know, he suffered because he was so overweight.
Mm-hmm.
But there is also post-traumatic improvement. There is post-traumatic strength.
Look, Carm, look at this.
It's not all evil. It doesn't have to be evil just because you were bullied. Many kids who were bullied go into social work or they go into nursing or
Now, Carm,
because sometimes people, you know what they say, the only child syndrome, they're always the worst person in the room because they're spoiled.
Exactly.
My mom has never called me that. By the way,
or the youngest who is spoiled.
Look at this tater tot. Carm got her hair done. Looks beautiful. Only one of us got our hair done. That was me. I got a haircut, but of course, Carm gets the credit. It's unreal. Randy, to you,
he does this Sunday nights to torture himself.
Is this all but certain to be a death penalty case, in your opinion?
Yes, with the caveat of if I were the prosecution and I wanted to spare the parents, the family, the community, the friends, the agony of having to relive this and the agony of possibly their children being vilified to the extent that the defense has nothing else, I would offer to take the death penalty off the table in exchange for a plea.
I mean, that would be a win for the defense lawyers. If you look at the Lori Vallow case, her criminal defense lawyers won that case by getting the death penalty off the table.
Agreed.
You know, that was their whole job on that trial, was just don't let her get the death penalty. And I think that.
What about Chad? What will happen to Chad?
Randy, Chad Daybell, death penalty, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Sarah asks, back to you, Randy, how can they possibly find a jury that has not heard of this case? I don't own a TV and I know about it.
Well, because it is a two-part test. It is not simply, have you heard about this case? Because if it was simply, have you heard about this case, then any high-profile defendant could never be tried, except maybe jumping on an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos rocket and trying the case up in the moon. So there's a second part of the test, which is, can you be fair and impartial? Can you set aside whatever you may have learned about this case? Can you put off to the side whatever preconceived notions that you have about what's going on and simply look at the defendant as innocent right now, sitting in that chair, and listen only to the evidence, see only the evidence that comes out during the trial before you make a decision? And if the answer from the juror is yes, I can be fair and impartial, I can leave out of the courtroom everything else that I may have learned, and I look at the defendant as innocent until you, judge, tell me to retire to begin my deliberations, and that's the moment where I can now change my mind. If a juror can say that, then a defendant technically gets a fair and impartial jury.
Scott, interesting development, I thought, and it was kind of subtle in the Dateline piece, and that is they interviewed a woman from DeSales University where he was getting his master's prior to moving to the University of or Washington State University, I should say. And this woman said that Bryan Kohberger would stare at her. And they asked her if she was kind of freaked out. And she said it was just Bryan being Bryan. What was interesting, Scott Roeder, her name is Madison. Do you read anything into that? Could he have been fixated on Madison's? As we know, Madison Mogen was killed in this horrific crime.
Well, I mean, I think, when you're dealing with people that are clearly not well, right? And whether he's, mentally insane doesn't mean he's not criminally liable, right? So you can be mentally crazy and also criminally liable. So when you got a guy like this, obviously, if you commit 4 murders and you plan it out, there's something wrong with you, deeply seated wrong with you. And I wouldn't put it past somebody like this to obsess over a name of somebody, that might have been a friend, or slighted him to slight other people. Could be some kind of an association. It's a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but everything that I look at on this case from a scientific standpoint of the evidence and what he did and what he had a plan to do this and then get away, even for the time that he did get away, and then the behavior that he did, before he got arrested, wearing the gloves all the time and all that stuff and tying up his garbage, to me is, a person who planned this carefully. I think, I don't know if that has anything to do with it. But I wouldn't put it past him, but this guy's sick, and, it's hard to put logic to people that are that sick. I don't know.
And Troy, I mean, you could potentially be a juror. You live in Idaho. One of the comments was about his eyes. They're just dead eyes, like shark eyes, no expression. Do you think jurors specifically, are going to sit in a courtroom and just look at this guy and get a sense that he is creepy and not all there? He comes across that way. So what's your thought on the way people will respond to him in general?
That probably depends on how good his attorney is and how good of an actor he can be. He doesn't seem to be a great actor at this particular point from the images we have of him in different courtroom situations. But and it's very possible, there's a lot of rural areas in Idaho. It's very possible that he could have a jury that's, fairly impartial and hasn't really heard of the case. that much, or at least the details of it. I hadn't followed the details of it. But I think, I mean, I get a vibe from him that he's creepy. He's got that kind of that flat look that makes you go, you know, there's something off about this guy. It doesn't necessarily say killer, but there's something off about this guy. And and obviously from my perspective, I would not be able to be impartial. I would never make it onto a jury panel because, you know, having had a stepson that's there at the school, his girlfriend, stuff like that lived right next door, there's no way an attorney would let me anywhere near that jury. But there are probably plenty of people that would. But I think he does give off that creepy, something's off with this guy, weird vibe. And I think the more that his defense team can coach him in ways not to look that way, like blink every now and then or something, then maybe, you know, that would be better.
Blinking is helpful. Yeah, it makes you look human, right?
Yeah, that blinking and not, I mean, the other thing is if he's making eye contact with jurors, I mean, he should just be, you know, straight ahead, head down, and avoid that eye contact probably as much as possible because he's got that weird, you know, stare, that long stare.
You look at the Menendez brothers and, you know, their trial. I was just recently researching that because I was doing a podcast on vigilantism. And so I was looking at the Menendez case as like, are they vigilantes? And you look at their demeanor in the courtroom. They were confident, good looking kids, and they were very personable and smile. And I think that went against them. If they would have just sit there sullen and like this, I think they would have got a better chance of getting a not guilty verdict for what they've been through in their life. But, you know, they were all, you know, personality.
They didn't look like they were taking it seriously. They looked like, oh, yeah, we're going to get off. We're good. And not like this was something that's as serious as it is. I think a normal person, if you were innocent. Oh, yeah. If you were innocent in this situation, I would be like, you know, there'd be a certain amount of being terrified, a certain amount of not wanting to make eye contact with the jury, not doing anything to compromise.
Show your humanity, you know.
But show your humanity a little bit.
Speaking of humanity, Scott Roeder, that traffic stop and we're going to wrap in just 5 minutes or so everyone can get to Succession and Barry, and I can get back to being yelled at by my mom. But God, 53 years old, Scott, still getting yelled at by her. It never ends.
Needs to be straightened out.
Yeah. Oh boy. Forgot it's Sunday night. Anyway, this traffic stop in Pullman, Washington, it was for me, it was a look. My dad's a psychiatrist. My mother is a social worker. So I look at the psychological aspect of people. He was just very awkward, almost, I would say hovering on the spectrum potentially. He was questioning this officer over and over about a obscure law about crosswalks and saying he comes from a rural area. What did that illustrate for you in terms of who this guy is?
Well, I think this guy is somebody trying really hard to blend, but he's not a blender. This guy sticks out because of what he is on the inside, but he's trying to hide that, in my opinion. He was hiding that all the way through his program, trying to get a job for the Pullman Police Department. He was hiding it by trying to be what he was not. He was pretending to be for justice and science when really that was just a mask to cover the darkness underneath.
One thing we never mentioned, that allegedly, according to his classmates, he was doing heroin in high school.
Wow, that's
what do you make of that, Carm?
I make out of that he was trying to self-medicate.
Yeah, trying to numb the pain. That's a good point, Carm.
Thanks, Joel.
Randy,
they were trying to do in high school, though. It seems like a weird
That's when he was fat.
Yeah, he was a fat kid. I hate to use that expression, but that's what he called himself, or that's what he's referred to as.
But wait, what would be the proper expression that you don't call fat? Weight challenged? He's
weight challenged, Carm. He's weight challenged.
Fat's fine. I think fat's fine.
And now, Carm, I had something that I was going to ask Randy, and now you it escaped me, but I will get it back once I.
It's a sweet revenge because
I'm just going to try not to carb load tonight.
Yeah.
You're making me feel uncomfortable.
Randy, will the prosecutor and the defense have the surviving witness go to forensic witnesses go to forensic psychiatrists to find out why they didn't call police sooner? So these two surviving roommates, in the court of public opinion, there's basically two sides: those who say leave them alone, and others who say what was going on here. And it's very difficult to put yourself in the shoes of these victims. But will the state and defense use this to either their advantages?
Well, certainly. And look, I was guilty of it a few moments ago when I was talking about all the reasons why to avoid a trial. I forgot about these survivors. And that's an equally important reason to try to avoid the trial, to put the survivors on the witness stand and have them relive it. But the bigger point is they get forgotten about, and they are really an integral part, as you just said, of both sides' cases. You have a survivor who will be able to testify to the eyes and the eyebrows and the outfit and the walk and the height and the physical characteristics, and will be able to take that jury step by step what happened. And that is almost as good as having them walk through that house. Having a survivor there is critical for the prosecution because it breathes life into the case. It's not some abstract conversation. I was there. Let me take you through it. It's a critical witness for the defense also. Why? Because we have an enormous gap of time that right now no one can explain away. That could be in and of itself reasonable doubt. But to your listener's question, your podcaster's question, nobody can compel any witness right now to do anything. And I think that if I'm a prosecutor, I probably don't need another expert weighing in who now is going to be cross-examined by the defense and punch holes in that. I think it's going to be what it's going to be in terms of the witness testifying. And I think that both sides are really going to be working very hard to come up with a story to explain the 8 hours.
Randy, one other really interesting thing from Dateline, I thought, and then we'll wrap it up, I promise you. So there was body cam footage of a random student on campus from March 2022, which is, I think, prior to when Bryan Kohberger, if I have the dates right, forgive me. It's prior to when he was on campus. And this woman called police to say that someone took items out of her suitcase, moved them around, and that pair of panties was found on the passenger side. Is that a gift to defense attorneys potentially if Bryan Kohberger was not, if they can prove that he was not in the area then? Do they now say, hey, maybe it was this guy, this other sick person who's going into clothing and moving stuff around? How does this, how significant is this?
It is potentially significant because the more seeds you can plant of reasonable doubt, such as, and I hate to use the word witch hunt, or it's really two words, if it is two words, a witch hunt.
You just muted yourself. Hold up. Did I do that? I'm sorry. There you go.
It reminds me of if you put a target up on the wall and you shoot at the target. You hit a bullseye, you hit a bullseye. What you're not supposed to do is shoot and then draw the bullseye around what you already shot. So the more proof that the defense can come up with to say, everybody wants it to be Bryan Kohberger, but they're wrong about this and they're wrong about that. That is, once again, how you build reasonable doubt. So if you've got the community looking, see, he did this to this girl. This is how whacked out this guy is. We've got the right guy. And now suddenly there's proof that he had nothing to do with it. He's got an alibi. Yeah, that's really, really bad stuff for a prosecutor to have to contend with.
Randy, how long does everyone think until the trial begins? You would know best. Sarah's asking that question.
It is so hard to say right now because we don't know where the prosecution is with discovery. We don't know about motions. He hasn't even been arraigned on the indictment yet. You could say, okay, he'll be tried in a year. The case will move more quickly because he's in custody. But this case, I hate to say it and to kind of pass the buck, this case is not going to go to trial until it's ready to go to trial.
I think it goes to trial on the anniversary of the killing.
Interesting.
I
This would be
certainly,
November.
if I'm the defense, I sure as hell don't want that.
I'm telling you, it's always funny how that happens. I do a lot of criminal defense work, and I've had 3 cases that I've done in the past where the trial has been on the anniversary of the murder, including the Oscar Pistorius case.
Wow, and that would be this November then.
November 13th.
November 13th. Thank you, Carm, for fact-checking me. Troy Lambert, Carm fact-checks me in real time. Troy Lambert is an Idaho-based freelance writer, mystery author, multi-genre editor, and nonfiction author and ghostwriter. A wealth of experience and knowledge, especially in and around Moscow. He is the author of the popular Max Boucher Murder Mystery series. His stepson graduated the University of Idaho while all of this was transpiring. I'm curious, Troy. Jody writes, this guy killed before. What do you think in your closing thoughts on where we are right now?
I think it's hard to say at this point whether he killed before. I would say if he wasn't caught, he probably would have killed again. But this may have been his first attempt. And honestly, the way he got caught may have been showing his incompetence and the fact that it was his first attempt.
Scott Roeder, founder of the Evidence Room. Someone said you look like the dude from Limp Bizkit, not Eminem. He is an internationally recognized evidence specialist who has consulted over 1,500 cases since 2001, including the very famous Oscar Pistorius case. The Evidence Room employs a team of specialists with backgrounds in art, 3D modeling, forensic animation. It goes on and on and on. And he is the host of the Crime Scene Time Machine. That's his background, the Crime Scene Time Machine. And he is a proud Clevelander, as he should be. Scott, what is the most damning evidence, since that is your world, in your opinion, that you have seen? So not seen, but that you've heard of so far.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I love being here. You guys are amazing. And it was so great to meet you, Carm, finally on the air.
Same.
Yeah.
Vice
I
versa.
think thank you so much. I think the number one thing, evidence-wise, is the behavior of Bryan Kohberger himself, the evidence tying him to the physical location, his evasiveness, and the activities he was engaged in at the time of his arrest that demonstrates consciousness of guilt. And I think, he's going down. He's going down hard.
Randy Zellin, he is a New York-based former prosecutor turned criminal defense attorney. Not that you needed me to tell you he's in New York, because you heard taxis, you heard his wife yelling at him, you heard ambulances, you heard it all in just an hour and 28 minutes. He's got more than 30 years experience. He's tried cases against the Department of Justice as well as the SEC. He's an adjunct professor at Cornell Law, making his Jewish mother proud, Mom, unlike me, appearing on Fox News, and the list goes on, Fox Business, CNN Headline News, Bloomberg, Newsmax, News Nation. And now I'm going to check his bio in a week. He's going to have STS at the very top. He better.
Oh, yes.
Because I see that he changes it frequently. So he will update it with that. I had a final question for you, Randy. And now, once again, my mother's stare has forced the question from my mind. Do you think this guy has killed before?
I have no idea. And like a prosecutor, I would not be the least bit focused on it, because the more I start thinking outside of the universe of the evidence, the danger I put my case in, because if I'm wrong about something, now I am diverting everyone's attention from the evidence in this case to this other stuff. We've seen it too many times. Worry about your case, your evidence, keep it simple, keep it tight, and have a story. And I will say it now, as I've said it before, I don't see the story yet from the prosecution. Even on your show today, we've seen so many different perspectives, so many different theories, so many different reasons from people who are far smarter than me, but we all haven't really agreed on this one straight line from point A to point B. So as far as I'm concerned, with Mr. Kohberger's guilt or lack thereof, stay tuned.
And very quickly, Randy, if you're his defense team, what are you doing right now in these days, potentially months before the trial? What are you doing?
I am doing my best to managing the media, because all of these people who are hearing the podcast like yours and the newspapers and the internet, they're all potential jurors. And yes, there is a gag order in place. I am certainly keeping a very, very close eye and keeping the prosecutor on a very tight leash in terms of turning over discovery. It is critical. The more physical evidence, putting him at the scene or putting them at his scene, that's the stuff that convictions are made of. So this case right now is all about the discovery that the prosecution is going to be turning over to the defense.
So far, there is no narrative and there is no motive.
They don't have to prove motive though. But Joyce Johnson,
No, but there isn't. I mean, it's easier if you have a motive.
It's easier, but it's not. There's no burden.
No
correct?
burden,
Yes,
not
no
a
burden.
burden,
We've
no
learned enough
burden.
to know that. Joyce
Yeah.
Johnson, love Carm's accent. You have an accent? I did
No,
not
I
know that.
don't know.
Reminds me of a former Jewish neighbor friend that was also a Holocaust survivor. Her R's. Wait till you hear her try to say her V's. Barbara says, Joel, are you jealous of Anderson Cooper? You are. Thank you. You're much
That's
better.
right.
way
but
better
the
than
answer,
Joel.
the answer is
way better
yeah.
hair.
The short answer is
better
yes.
hair.
I am jealous of him, but I still think he can't spit out a question. Quick programming note. First of all, thanks to all these best guests. They're awesome. Randy, even though this is a bit of a train wreck on Sunday nights, do you promise to come back as we go further down this road?
We can
As long as
offer
you promise to
a night-
ask me back, of course I will.
Awesome.
We
I love
can
it.
offer you a night when I'm not on. I'm only on Sunday night.
And I won't be on. I'm only on if you're on.
Special offer.
So, quick programming note. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern time, we have the founders of the Cold Case Foundation. They were featured on Dateline. They're going to come on and talk about some of what we found out on Dateline. And we've got two fantastic lawyers, Tara Malik from Boise, Greg Skordas from Utah. We're going to talk about the court proceedings that will happen tomorrow morning. And Tuesday night, we're back on the Dan Markel murder case for one night, Wednesday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, a lunch live. You've got Jennifer Koffendorfer of the FBI. You've got Kerry Rawson, who is BTK's daughter, and she is a true crime devotee, knows more about this case than just about everyone. She will give us her perspective and some of the comparisons being made between Bryan Kohberger and BTK. And someone told me not to call him BTK because that's what he wanted to be called, so we should call him Dennis Rader, which is his real name. And last but not least on the show on Wednesday, Brian Enton. If you don't know Brian Enton from News Nation, Google him. He's got a quadrillion followers. Everyone turns to him for all the true crime news. He will be here 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Until then, love you, America. Love you, Manhattan, even though I don't miss you that much.
I'm now imitating.
Love you a lot, Cleveland.
Love you, America.
Love you, Moscow, Idaho, and Idaho in general. All the best. Love you all. All right, guys.